terrific then, and I have to say that I think it's also extremely clever and fun when I watched it again this afternoon. And I hope you feel the same. This film was relevant then, and it's just as relevant today. And in a way, I'm sorry to say that, but things being what they are in our country, there's lots of lessons here, and there's lots of examples of different personalities with different political interests and different animosity towards each other. And I find it to be a wonderful parable about contemporary society and the divisions between provincialism and big city, the red states and blue states, between the perceived elites and the perceived people in the boonies, all of whom have merit, but seem to be fighting an endless culture war that has also culminated in the last two Supreme Court decisions this week. So there's lots there to pick apart, not that anything is a specific reference, but there's also a lesson in this film, many lessons about what art is and how different people see it differently. And, you know, we've talked about that roundabout in this discussion group for a couple of years, how we can have different opinions about what happened and see different motivations into the characters. So there's some very specific instances I want to cite. If anybody would like to start it off, I have my own agenda of moments I'd like to pick out.
Tell us the name again.
Distinguished Citizen.
Thank you.
Okay, you've seen the picture, Miriam? Did you watch the film?
I did indeed.
Oh, good.
I watched it a bit of a while ago, and I think I need to watch it again because some of it was lost to me. But I hope you'll clarify it, Jim, because you're very good.
Okay, well, I hope so. But at first, when I first saw it, it did seem a little oblique, but seeing it this time, with all we've been through, I saw it with, I think, fresher eyes, and it's pretty much on the surface. So let's start with the surface, which is the pseudo Nobel Prize ceremony, where he shocks everybody by speaking his mind, saying, I'm honored to get this award, but because I've pleased you, it means I haven't fulfilled my mission as an artist. Does anybody want to discuss what his mission is as an artist, based on his words in Susie?
I would like to go backwards a little bit because I don't think that was exactly the beginning. The beginning was when he was telling his family that he had mixed feelings about going. Do you remember that? He didn't say
the very first scene in the movie is the Nobel Prize.
Okay, but then he talks about whether he's.
But that's ahead of this. So what's his declared position on accolades and claim and fame?
All right.
Frank.
Yes, he says that his purpose of art is to shock and to not necessarily please. And
okay, Miriam, please mute yourself when you're not talking. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, that was it. That it should just be disturbing and shock you and whatever.
Yeah, it's a little more.
My own feeling of that was that that's one form of art. It certainly isn't all art, but any rate, in how that I'd be interested in how that theme is carried through in the plot in the later.
Well, when he announced that part of his purpose was to shock. Hannah, please mute Miriam because it's distracting. What did you feel towards him? Were you irritated? Were you at least one of those angry leftists, or those progressives? What did you feel?
Well, I also he was insulting. He not only had a different take on art, but he was making a point of not being conventional by not bowing or whatever it is to the king and queen, which I didn't notice was going on at the time, but later is referred to.
Right.
So he ignores conventions.
Right, but I want to talk about what you felt about him in the first scene.
What I felt about him.
I mean, you already told us.
Unusual, but I didn't have negative feelings at the beginning at all. It was. I was looking forward to what his take would be. It was unusual. That was it.
Who else noticed something else in that speech? Gail?
What struck me is there are some people who have not accepted that award. Very major people in literature who have not accepted it. The fact that he went on the stage and he was acquiescing to accepting this award. And then he gives a speech, made me less of a man in my eyes.
Because he dared to appear rather than bravely didn't appear?
Yes, because he
people-
took it and then he spit it out again,
Well, I think this is very typical of his behavior in the rest of the movie, where he tries to explain his position about art and politics and meaningfulness.
Yes.
And he's speaking as a teacher there. He does humbly say, I'm very flattered and very grateful, but it also brings about, it signifies the end of my role as an artist because I've pleased you, the academic establishment. And yeah, eyes roll, and the applause at the end was very tame and slow in coming, but then people stood up and applauded him. So some people got him from the beginning and approved of his stance. He's sacrificing himself. He'll never be asked there again, but who knows what this will do. Anybody else want to chime in on that opening? Arlene?
Yeah, I just felt he was an arrogant narcissist. I felt he was insulting to the people that were there to honor him because they didn't, I guess, they were shocked by what he said.
I want to call attention to the opening image of the film, which is him in the anteroom.
Yeah,
waiting.
Jim, I just thought of something additional about that opening. The woman who escorts him, that opening scene, she's standing very erect and almost at attention while he is dozing off or whatever, waiting to be called on stage. And she's almost like a showpiece, a token or whatever. And it's almost mimicked later on in the movie when there is a someone
you're right.
on the beauty the model or something in the small
Let's
town.
back up to that. There is something also very traditional and militaristic. She's wearing a military white cap to comment her pure white gown.
But I don't know whether is that what actually happens at the awards?
I don't know.
The Nobel?
I don't know.
And I'm so sorry to interrupt. My husband has been trying to get on downstairs. I'm upstairs since the inception, and you're not letting him in, or he can't get in.
7 people seem to be in the waiting room. I will try to admit him right now.
His name is Marvin Alperin.
Lots of people, admit. Oh, Judy Pies, Natalie Shapiro, Steve Zimmerman. I don't see him.
Oh, it says Miriam Alperin. That's the one. Yeah, that's Marvin, my husband downstairs. You see, it says Roz, Arlene, Joel,
He should be in by now.
Miriam Alperin. Can you let him in?
Anna, could you take care of that? And let's mute everybody until I call on them, please.
Yeah. Everybody's in.
Okay, please mute everyone.
Yeah.
Where were we? Oh, about the woman. Now I want to talk about the first image, which is him with his head in his hands. It's not that he's dozing. He's anguished about what is he going to say? How is he going to thread the eye of the needle and say what he has to say and be true to himself and not be rude? And that's why his words are so measured. So it's hard to read that downtrodden expression. It's not out of boredom. It's out of anguish, and he's thinking. Somebody else have a comment before we move on? Brad?
I just wanted to add that for me, I immediately thought of Bob Dylan.
Yeah,
And Bob-
refusing the award.
Right, when he didn't show up for to receive the award, although he did send in some written comments down the line,
Right.
But
This
for some reason, my mind just went, right away to Bob Dylan, that this is sort of the temperament of an artist and how they perceive themselves, and they're not going to be conventional.
Exactly right. And in many ways, to decline the award is conventional artist position. This movie was made before Dylan refused the award, by the way. Effie, hi.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself, Effie.
Yeah.
And then Brad, sorry.
It's sort of a prediction of the total movie, because he often says one thing and does another thing. So he's changed. His actions are quite different than his speech. in many instances during the movie.
Well, please call them out for us. I'm sure other people have a difference of opinion with you. Brad,
What do you mean call them out?
when we're discussing a moment that you feel where he contradicts himself in some
Okay.
way, I understand where that impression comes from. I think he counters that quite well in each case, until the very end when it's a surprise. Brad?
Well, I think the first scene is the first of 3 or 4 that deal with some givens that we have come to accept about great art. First of all, that great art is subversive. If you ask literary critics, what were the greatest novels of the 20th century, they would pretty uniformly agree that it was Proust and Joyce with Ulysses and Remembrance of Things Past. Both works extremely subversive, did things in literature that no one had done before. The other one that comes to mind that's developed later in the movie is the idea of the suffering artist. Great art comes from suffering.
He denies
The other
that.
one that is developed here is, and this is the heart of the movie, is the relationship between art and life.
Right.
Does
I
an artist can we read into art the artist's personal experiences? So the first scene, it just sets the stage for these topos about art, things that we have come to accept one way or the other, and questions them.
Right, it absolutely does. It sets the stage. But even though other great artists who have been revolutionary have received the same award, the Nobel Academy, the Nobel Committee, the jurors can also be like the Academy of Motion Pictures, can also be deemed extremely conservative and in denial of great art and revolutionary art. So there's this notion of what's popular, what's good, what's comforting, what's considered beautiful. I mean, it's up for grabs. And in a way, that's his point. I don't want to create beauty. I want to create meaningful art. And I believe somewhere in that speech, if not elsewhere in the picture, sure, it's elsewhere, he says, the world's a terrible place. And most people are comfortable with reality, but artists aren't. They have to present an alternative to reality, to critique it and to suggest something better. That's who they must be. And this is the work they must do. So that's his puritanical stance as a, I won't say non-traditional artist, but clearly he's a purist in terms of the artist. Now, he does say, and we'll come to that scene later, where no, art is not about suffering. There have been many happy artists. So it comes about from your vision of reality and how you choose to interpret it. But it's not just unhappiness that makes great art. It's a little easier to create from suffering because the emotions are gushing out of you. So let's move on. But it's a very interesting notion that when an artist gets too much praise, he stops being an artist and he may play to the audience instead of nourishing them with new ideas. But people do acknowledge that. I mean, there are dualities all over this picture. We think he's rude. The audience ultimately accepts him and gives him a standing ovation, some of them. So again, this film means to live in the gray area. And to do that, it's taken a man who's firmly planted his feet on one side or the other of that divide of what is art. Susie, unmute. Unmute, lower left, Susie.
I'm doing it. Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. I felt that as a person, his personality, his sensitivity was so limited. The talk that he gave to the people in Europe or wherever he was with the Nobel Prize, and how he treated the people in, am I saying the city right, the town, the village, Salima, is that what it was in Argentina?
Alice is the name of the village.
Alice. His expectations and the way he treated them not only was it rude, but it had no compassion whatsoever. It would be like if I went into kindergarten and I had a 7th grade curriculum or a 10th grade curriculum, and I was talking to everybody, to all the children like that. I think that he was pompous, and I don't understand why the writer, what the intention was. Am I
Okay.
getting what it was for me to get the feeling that he was?
Let's
rude
hope we can demystify that for you, because I'm
Okay.
sure other people will feel that that was not his attitude towards the people in the small village. I felt he was extremely solicitous and tried to explain in very humane and loving terms the difference between the outer world and this smaller world that he came from. I didn't find any rudeness at all. I thought he bent over backwards to be courteous and kind and not chastise them for being rubes in the hinterlands. I mean, they could have been in Idaho or Wyoming, or some senator who said the immigrants have calves like grapefruits because they're running marijuana across the border, or they're rapists and thieves. No, that was not he was not condescending at all. He was saying, listen, I don't blame you people for the life you have here. He wasn't even saying that. He was just trying to explain how the rest of the world is different. I want to call attention to his arrival, if we can move on. I don't know if you caught this. He's kind of grumpy. I see that. And remember, there's this Nuria, his secretary, who makes the arrangements for him. He summons her to his office. Oh, first she reads all the invitations, and he's turning them all down. Doesn't want to go anywhere, doesn't want to respond to it, because this adulation troubles him. He doesn't like it. So he's being consistent with his persona that we saw in the award ceremony. But then he thinks about it for a while, and he calls her back in this beautiful shot where he's on a balcony over a wonderful library filled with books and a big green yard behind. Guy's obviously very comfortable, has done very well as an author. And this is Barcelona. And he calls her back. And when she arrives at his apartment, I want to play this scene. Let me see. Hannah, can you make me co-host? And I'll try and play it in screen share again. Let me know when I'm co-host, Hannah. Oh, looks like I am already. Oh, no, I'm not. There it is. Okay. Share. Okay, can people see the image from the film on the screen? Yes or no?
No.
Well, you have to click the arrow. There.
There you go. So, see, smiling here. Look at that. That's the first time we've seen him smile in the whole movie. And it's 11 minutes in. Why do you think he's smiling? What happened?
We're not seeing that.
Oh, you're not. Is anybody seeing it?
It went away.
It went away when is it playing now?
No.
No.
Okay, then we won't do it. Sorry, I wish I could make this work. It works in my other Zooms. So let me bail out of that. Stop sharing. Now we're all back.
Okay.
So when Nuria comes back, he's smiling in his Reams plywood chair. I think that's a wonderful touch because it's a modernist house. So that's very chic. And a lot of psychiatrists have those. And but his is well worn. You can see all the leather rubbings. And he doesn't understand why he's smiling. And he says, I'm going to go. And she says, where? And he says, I'm going to go to Salis. And he's turned down all these other invitations. Why Salis? He said, that's it. I'm going alone, not with you. I'm going. He's made a decision to go back to his hometown. He's been thinking, and we don't know what he's been thinking about. It's not resolved until the end. There's a long, not too long, it's 7 or 10 seconds before this, when he's pacing on the balcony and he's staring out the window. And what's he thinking about? It's been 5 years, by the way, since he's written a book, and 5 years since the award ceremony. So something about the invitation to go back home has intrigued him. And I think this is a lovely plant that pays off later in the film. Did anybody else feel that way? That they were surprised when he said, I'm going to go to Salis? No. Okay.
Effie,
yes.
I think this is the first example of where he says one thing and does another.
Well, wait a second.
Goes.
Have you never changed your mind, Effie?
But that's not the point. The point is he said one thing and now he's going to do another thing.
Well, what do you think happened in between?
He thought about it.
Isn't that a good thing, a good trait?
I didn't say it was bad.
Well, but let's not accuse him of being a hypocrite then.
No, I never did.
Well, saying one thing and doing another is often.
He says, well, I think my point then, I didn't express it right. He says one thing and then he does later the right thing.
Ah, okay. That's different. That's
Yes.
a reason.
Sorry.
A man of integrity who's realized the error of his prejudices. Okay, thank you for that, Effie. Brad?
Well, as we look back on the movie after the final scene and we think about this, are we seeing his life or are we seeing his fiction? And that's the dilemma that the author or that that's being presented to us, the relationship between art and fiction.
Life. Exactly right. And this is why I find it an exceptional film that has a meta existence. It's about art and life and art and reality, but it's ensconced in this thriller because of this amazing flashback we have no idea we're watching, which is the story of the book. But there are all kinds of clues or indications of this conflict between what's in the story and what's in real life that happened. I miss this think time that he had here the first time I saw it. And the second time I watched it, which was years ago, I picked up on that. It's great to see him smile. It makes him human. And then he goes and, he flies internationally and then the guy picks him up at the airport. The guy who's not a taxi driver, the guy who has not the car that he first goes to, but the beat up car. I mean, that's hilarious. This country bumpkin is sent to pick him up in the big city and drive him 7 hours to Salis, where they have a flat tire on the shortcut, which is hilarious. And then what happens? Because they have to overnight on the shortcut. What do? They build a fire. How do they start the fire?
Pages of his book.
Pages of his book. And he points out that own irony. Isn't it amazing that I have to burn my own book to survive? He's exaggerating, but it's an irony. It doesn't have to be perfect science or a perfect contrast. But, when we see book burning, we think of destroying lives. And this is one instance where it's a survival tool. But it's a humbling thing. My book doesn't amount to anything because it's just print on a page. But the page as fuel for the fire that will sustain us through the night is important. That's the joke. Very knowing.
Jim, why do you think they sent him this weird guy with this crappy car?
Okay, I'll let you answer that question. Was it a prosperous town?
No, but they had better vehicles than that.
Was it a sophisticated town?
No.
Okay. Was the mayor going to spend much money on getting the guy there?
I obviously not.
Okay, so that's enough of an excuse for me. They're Hicks, they're all Hicks, but they reveal an innate sense of politics by the way they treat him once he arrives.
They also use the book page for toilet paper, correct?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's in the morning. The morning.
The mayor has some savvy, though. The mayor of the town is a politician.
Well, this
kind of know. He's
Yeah.
not so much a country bumpkin. He's a little more.
He's a Machiavel. He's thinking about his next election and how the state will treat their village.
Which is why I'm surprised he didn't send a good car to get him there safely,
Right.
because he wanted to use him
It was a
to
good joke.
help himself.
Jim, a couple of people have had hands up, and I know that Fern isn't here, but people are kind of jumping in.
Okay.
So
Why don't you jump in? I
think
see your hand.
yeah, it's been up. I have something to say that I don't know how you're all going to react, but we've all seen the whole movie. How you respond to the end determines how you really should be talking about this movie. Because the end, you have to go back and rethink the movie and see how what you believe. And if you believe that this is fiction, then the whole discussion is different, because it's why did he write it that way? What was he thinking? What did he want us to think? And that made me want to go back and see the whole film again, which I didn't have time to do. But I can't discuss it the way we're discussing it without dealing with that issue. Is it real? Did it happen? Or did he just write it?
Okay, here's the thing. We know he went back because he said that in a real time when he tells his assistant, book me the flight, I'm going in a week. The other thing is that you may remember, because we're all of a certain age, let me scan.
Wait a minute, I don't accept what you just said.
You're not of a certain age? Okay.
No. Before that,
Oh,
that she got the plane tickets. That's all part of the story for me.
okay. I grant you that. But the whole point is, you may remember the advertising in the 80s or 90s for, we had little cassette tapes we could buy and put music on. And what was Memorex's advertising line? Is it real or is it Memorex? Okay, so was the quality of recording so good you couldn't tell it from reality? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. It's that good. So the film asks us, it's its ultimate statement about art and life. It's what you draw from it. And I think you have seen enough of it and responded enough of it to play along with the film's game and to react. Again, I'm sensing here our usual strain of realism, where everything has to be realistic or it's not valid. Oh, but if it's a total fiction, then it's okay. Well, we've had many films that we've discussed that have been total fictions, but people have questioned its reality. So I'm not asking you to pick a stand, because people will continue to believe what they want to believe. But that's what the film is all about. The relativistic perception of reality. It means different things to different people based on your mood and the time and the context in which you encounter it. And that's okay. And that's, what's the last shot of the movie? He's looking at the camera and he gives us a devilish grin. He's thumbing his nose at us as, you decide, come on, it's your life. I just reacted to it my way. And the lessons are there if you choose to see them. So it was a wonderful bookend for me. I was totally hooked on it being real until that last moment when I said, oh my God, he was pulling our leg. That's the book he wrote. He still could have gone back though. And experience, no, why could he not have experienced some of what we saw and told it in a different way? We don't know.
Because I don't think, just the man that I met at the beginning and at the Nobel Prize is not a man who would be that rude and that mean. And I couldn't see a whole town doing that. I was into it, but I was relieved by the ending. And I think that's different than believing that he would do all those things. And he announced at the Nobel that he was not going to write anymore. That was a setup. That was a setup for us.
But he did.
And,
okay,
yeah.
So say
But-
all this, then was the Nobel Prize a setup as well? Did that never happen? Or
I
did
don't.
it happen in the
I
very-
don't think that. We saw a film, and I do not remember which film it was, but we saw a film where somebody was rehearsing how they rehearsed for how you get the Nobel Prize. I think it was somebody who was getting a prize for
The Mother, and it was Glenn Close and Jonathan Pryce, where he's a very pretentious blowhard, and she actually helped him write his books, but takes no credit for it.
exactly. And we saw how
Formal.
practiced and formal that is, so that you ask about the woman. We saw the woman who escorts. We've seen that. We know it.
There were two women, and that was a higher budget film. Okay.
But
so-
anyway, it's I think it's fascinating. I enjoyed the movie the whole time, but I thought it was a little bit over the top that the people would be that nasty. But anyway, that's it.
Okay, the
That's
people
just
were
my
nasty.
feeling.
But I want to focus on him, because I don't feel, and I'd like somebody else to chime in on this, maybe Steve Zimmerman, because he hasn't spoken yet. I don't feel he was that nasty when he first addressed the community, when he first arrived and the next morning when he received the award from the beauty queen, he was very humble and grateful and modest. And when he gave his first lecture, I think he did a very good job of explaining what artistic virtue and integrity means. And I didn't find him condescending. I thought he was trying to be a real teacher of the highest order. Now, does anybody agree with me, or did I see it wrong? Steve Zimmerman.
Well, I basically agree with you. I think he went in sort of taking the high road and was trying to explain art from his point of view and what his writings were about. As certain characters in the community got very combative with him, he kind of got dug in and got combative back the other way, because he considered himself a very principled kind of person. But I think he started out being willing to try to communicate with people about what he was about. And half the community seemed to respect him, actually. This Romero character had it in for him, obviously. No, I think I sort of agree with you on that. I don't want to get ahead, but as principled as he was, I don't know why he changed his mind about the wheelchair at the end. That's sort of
that's too far ahead.
Yep.
It's too far ahead, but thank you for that. Let's see, Iris, you haven't spoken yet. Unmute, please. Iris, you're muted. Lower left.
I guess I'm not as critical a thinker with art as some of you are, because what I felt right off was I couldn't not let go of the title of the film. Why would he go back to that town of Solace to take a Distinguished Citizens Award in the first place? When he went back there, I felt very much that he was condescending, very much. And that I felt that the people, as unsophisticated as they were, saw that right away. They saw him as sort of his pride and lording over them what he had become. And I don't know why he went back to that town. It doesn't make sense to me at all.
Based upon what we know of the whole film, I think whether it's real or Memorex fiction.
Either way.
He went back for story material. He said, I'm not going to write until I feel I have something to write about. And to him, the hero returning to the hometown, remember, you can't go home again.
Right.
Surprises that he encountered there was enough material for him to write about. Does that make sense?
So you're saying that the end justifies the means in this movie, that the end of his writing this possibly novel that he talks about at the end is what he went back to get the material. I don't
think he knew he would, but I think that that felt genuine enough for him. He saw the irony in this hick town inviting him back for an award, that he had insulted the Nobel Academy, for gifting him. Why would he do that? And I think
why would he do that?
He's intrigued. He's a creative person and he's mining reality. Remember, he said an artist takes reality and shapes it differently.
Well, I felt that the whole town was resentful of him, and they took.
How about the 5 people who came back for the second lecture?
Oh,
It wasn't a full house.
There was that.
And what about the daughter, Julia, who sleeps with them right off the bat, and the ex-girlfriend.
Okay.
We'll get to that. Okay. Clearly, more people. I think. Let's ask Arla what she has on her mind. If you can talk about, was he a decent person in the beginning or not to the townspeople?
Yeah. So I go back to this quote at the beginning that was woven throughout. Not only does he say that he can never go back, but he says that the townspeople can never leave. And so I think that there was just such a big gap between, his origins and what he had become as sort of a citizen of the world, because I do think he started out being more amicable. I think he started to turn when, he was kind of provoked and confronted. For example, when the mayor wanted and others wanted him to change his opinion.
That's a turning point. You're right.
Right, of the art contest that he judges. And I just think there was just such a big gap between between him and the townspeople. And that's why, like I said, I go back to that quote. Not only could he never go back, even though he did, but the people could never leave.
But that was his whole thesis. That's what he felt. That's why he went back to examine that. And that's the last line in the film.
Right.
In a way, it's a sorry state. It's a commentary on how divided we are, and how pointless art is in many ways, how futile it is. But he also says at the very end, I'm powerless not to engage in the fight. And those of us Torah study fans know that our job is not to change the world, but neither are we entitled to ignore it. So it's this irreparable humanistic pull to engage in reality and to perhaps treat it artistically, to change the course of that big ocean liner, to change our perceptions enough to make a difference so that we're kinder to each other, we're perhaps more aware of each other. We give people freedoms of their body, and we don't feel necessary to carry guns all over the place, and everybody should vote, unlike our founding fathers. So it's terribly relevant. And I think what we're discovering here is these black or white divisions, the line is drawn in the sand, and he tries to overcome it in the beginning, but he can't. And when he's asked to change his opinion about art, that's when he digs his feet into the sand. Arla, thank you for calling that out. That's the first time he can't go along with anything they're saying. And I was looking through my notes to find out when in the film that happens. And that's the mayor in the park sits down with him. The mayor's hilarious, by the way. And it's easily an hour into the film. It's at least an hour in the film, which is more than halfway. We're missing a couple really juicy points about it that have happened. The driver, okay? The driver who picks him up at the airport, he thinks the story is about real people, and he names, remember Daniel tells the story of twins, one with a beard and one without, one who gets the girl, one, he's killed by his twin brother, and then the mobsters come and they kill him because they think he's his brother. And the driver, the dumb driver, says, oh, that's the Rivatellos, those twins, and this other person is that. The driver is seeing into the story things from his own existence. Now, on the one hand, Daniel will feel, that's great. You're relating my fiction to your real experience. But Daniel only goes so far as to say, it's not really those guys, but if it reminds you of them, that's okay, right? It leaves open the door for the imagination of the audience to embellish in ways that go against the intentions of the author. And that's something I know Steve Greenberg and others who've taught know that your students don't often see that, and all the lawyers here know that sometimes a jury, hears what you're saying, but takes it a different way, perhaps 180 degrees apart, or read the newspaper and you'll see that any one statement is twisted all over the place. So we're dealing with some very important stuff in this film. And I think it's great because of it. So that starts with the pseudo taxi driver. Innocently says, oh, I know those guys. And then the next thing, after the first meeting with the townspeople, there's the kind of dumb, heavyset guy who says, my mother loves your work, come have lunch with us. You wrote about my father, he was the delivery guy, and you immortalized him. So again, the reader is personalizing the story to fit their life, not the reality of the world that the author was trying to create. And it's amusing, but he turns him down. And later on, that guy comes back and says, you stood us up for lunch. And the guy says, no, I didn't. I never said I'd come. Get off it. We have nothing in common. And the snobbishness is coming out. But clearly, he's fed up with people misconstruing his work, which is always going to happen. Those of you who've published, whether it's briefs or articles or contracts, that people will perceive things in different ways. And the art of arbitration and negotiation is to untangle the misperceptions to a point where you can at least see the same reality, whether or not you settle on them or not. So people believe what they want to believe about stories. And this is true. We've seen it here in class. For the last several years since the beginning, people have always perceived different things and gone off in different directions about characters. Totally misread scenes because of some little detail. And in this movie, I'm glad we haven't hit that too much yet, although it's interesting that Daniel's perceived as being mean to the townspeople from the get-go by some of us and not mean by others, that he tries in the beginning and then he turns when he's asked to change his mind about art. Again, he's a purist. He's an idealist about the purpose of art and the freedom that artists must have to do their work for society. Let's move on, unless somebody wants to chime in.
Well, a bunch of us have our hands raised and you're ignoring it all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not a mean person. I'm not the evil empire. I'm real busy here and I don't have anybody helping me today. So whoever said that, please forgive me. And you should be muted anyway. So let's see who hasn't spoken for a while. I think Judy Paz. Karen. Okay, Karen.
Okay. No, the one thing I noticed was at the Nobel ceremony, he was clean shaven. And at the very end, he was clean shaven. And for the whole rest of the movie, he had a beard, which would lend you to believe that the whole movie was the book, including when he decided to go to the town. I mean,
you could see it that way. I saw the beard as a sign of him excluding himself from society and being more of a hermit.
Okay.
5 years since the ceremony. He's a recluse because he feels society doesn't understand me.
But at the end, he didn't have the beard again.
Right, because he's rejoining society. He's at a book week to receive, it's a publicity press junket for the new book. So,
a real quick comment about burning his book. I mean, that follows directly from the Nobel scene where he talks about great art being incendiary. Yes. That's what great art does. It's sulfurous, it's subversive. And here his book is burning. So it's a perfect segue.
But it's not burning in ways he meant it to. It's the irony is, imagine I have to burn my own book to survive instead of lighting a flame under other people so they can survive. The Reiners, and then Judy.
Okay.
And then Steve Greenberg.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It just struck me. We were talking about that opening scene, and you had asked me what did I think of him, whatever, and I remembered that his talk about art should be shocking and disruptive. When you really think about it, that's what he did in his town. The town had its system, what it was going on. Their art show, and maybe there was politics involved and who got the award and whatever. They were going on. There were things under the cover, whatever. But the system, what we're led to believe was working, with all its imperfections. And when he came to town and became a focus, he was a disruptor. He was a disruptor in his own persona as the artist coming in. Left all kinds of turmoil in that town. That didn't exist before, we're led to believe. He's playing out what he said art does.
Right. So do you fault the mayor for being so naive not to anticipate this? The mayor is very egotistical and selfish. And I think he didn't see this consequence of his plan, but you're right, he does upset the whole town. But guess what? The whole town does need to be upset because of its own hypocrisy. And there's plenty of that.
But they were getting along, Jim. They were happy in their own remote small world there. Things were working in the system that they had. He came in and reality was seen and exposed and whatever, and left them disrupted.
I'm glad you said that, but should we let people wallow in their own dirt and their own pain and not try and help them
They
see
weren't hurting anybody else. They weren't hurting anybody else outside that town.
Oh,
They
I
had their
disagree.
culture. They
From
had
his point of view, excuse me for being an elitist, but from his point of view, allowing them to put the painting of the Pope in the finals because it was the Pope, and allowing them to put Dr. Romero's awful painting in because it was Dr. Romero, head of the Salas Visual Artists Association. To me, that's a no progress kind of society. When that kind of glib patronage gets paid, it's immoral and it's dishonest. And that is riven through this modest little society that's working on its own. But that's why people can't leave, because they're sucked into that morass of smallness.
I agree. But the fact remains that they had a system that was working for them.
Well, I mean, what's your position, Frank? You've tried to save people's lives in hospitals for
I
days.
think that the educational process, it's hard to think that a guy coming back to his hometown with having been recognized by the world in 3 days or whatever to completely change, their appreciation of art. That's unrealistic and whatever, but it's a movie, So that's what I pick from it. But I suddenly realized as I was listening to the discussion about he's working out what he said it was. Art is he's a change agent. He's a shocker. He's a whatever, and that's what he did in the movie. And it relates back to the beginning of the movie when he received the prize.
Right. I think that's a great observation. And I'll say this, that his intention is to be a humble guest and to try and educate them as to what art is all about. But Dr. Romero, who's not a doctor at all, intrudes, and the mayor intrudes, and the young girl intrudes, and everybody there has their own agenda for him, using him to achieve their own ends. So they are Machiavels as well. So I don't think it's fair to say he's using the town or he's condescending. They, in their own avaricious way, see their way out through him in some way. Julie, the daughter of his ex-girlfriend, wants to leave the town with him because she's sick of it. The mayor wants to be promoted to whatever to get reelected. Romero just wants to stay, king shit in the town and the Arts Association and be led that he's a painter. And the woman who's the secretary of the association just wants to keep the peace. And it's like, you can't keep Johnny on the farm for very long, but can't you change the farm at all? I mean, this is a culture war. And this is what I wanted to bring us to in our overview of this film. We are riven with the same divides that are expressed in this movie. And there are a number of conversations that are absolutely populist in nature. So Judy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to agree with everything you just said. And yes, he really was polite in the beginning. And it was the so-called art, the painting contest that made him stand on his principles and offend other people. But there's another part of it that we haven't really touched on. You touched on it in your written introduction, which had to do with the Peronis in the town and the politics. And I didn't exactly understand what that was about and why there were these thugs trying to hurt him, and why, for God's sakes, he got in the truck at the end with these guys who were obviously out to hurt him.
The other we can answer, and I was just getting there. I wanted to give people. That'll be the next thing we take on, because it's really important that you.
And I also found it amusing that in the very first lecture he gave, it was packed.
Yeah.
And then in the next lecture, you saw a sprinkling of empty chairs, but it was still okay. And then it just kept getting less and less until there were 4 or 5 people. And was that strictly a reflection of the fact that they were mad about the painting?
No, I think it's
bored.
It's their reaction to high art. It's above us. It's not, he flattered us. There's nothing left. And I didn't get half of what he said, so I'm not going back for the
So they got bored. Okay.
They weren't engaged.
Yeah.
It didn't work on them. And in a way, this is the irony of being an artist and the irony of self-important art. A lot of people aren't going to get it. It's going to go right by them. as it did most of the townspeople. They were simple people and their lives were working for them until he arrived. Steve Greenberg? Unmute, please.
Yes. I thought an alternate title for this movie could be "You Can't Go Home Again," but that's been used. But it reminded me of the quote, "Fish and house guests begin to stink after 3 days." This trip started off with one purpose for him, and it just deteriorated for all the reasons you mentioned. But I want to go back to the ending again, back to the future, because I saw it a completely different way. The very last scene illuminated the whole rest of the movie. It's like turning up the brightness on the whole thing, for many of the reasons that have already been discussed. In the next to last scene, he is shot in this climax you were just about to get to. And for all we know, he dies. He says, "The end." Literally, those are his last 2 words in that next to last scene. We then see a scene that I thought was going to be a memorial service for him. And
it looks like a funeral.
It turns out to be this press junket or a press conference about his new book. That meant to me, basically, someone said beard, no beard, then beard again. Or I'm sorry, no beard, then beard again. The book was the beard. And that's a way to look at it. That you said, Jim, that he gets this invitation and he thinks about it. That's when he starts writing the book in his mind. And that's what we see.
Right.
And he dies at the end of the book. In this news conference at the end, he says to people, everything is fiction and everyone's a character. There is no reality. I thought he was saying, fake news. He was saying that the only things we really can know are true are what we see, hear, smell, touch ourselves. Everything we see or hear or read in the news or books or anywhere else, we're getting from sources that we may or may not want to trust. And to me, we're in the year of fake news. Whoever heard that phrase before 2 or 3 years ago? But now everything you don't like and don't want to believe is fake news. You can choose your own facts now, contrary to what the politician said. So
Conway said, "Oh, we have."
I looked on this as this is a writer who gets the idea about going back to about writing a book about going back to his hometown, and he's going to bring them enlightenment, but they don't want it. And they're cheering in the streets when he's for 2 blocks when he's in his fire truck, and you hear what he has to say, and they get to see him, and like you said, they're disenchanted. That's not. I'm not going to go out again. Only 4 or 5 people show up for his second lecture, and it all turns to shit. But that's what he wrote about. That was the story he wrote, and what he's basically saying at the end was, you can believe it or not believe it. This is the fiction that I created.
Right. It's interesting in the junket at the very end of the film, he pulls his shirt open and he shows a scar on his chest.
Right.
Childhood accident? Is it this?
He says, is this a surgery or a bike accident or a wound? And maybe it was the wound when he was shot, but maybe not.
Well, the point is, it doesn't matter. I'm glad Howard isn't here because he'd kill us with this. But excuse me, Howard. I'm very fond of you, but the point is, this film invites us to allow our own insecurities and not to rely on closure. I think there's plenty of closure in the film. Basically, what we saw was his novel. I think he went back home. I think he gathered evidence, and what we saw was the novel, but that things didn't really happen quite that way when he was there. And that's okay. And it's like there's a lot of gray area that we have to live in to accept this movie is really cool. But if it put a smile on your face, it was funny, and there's lots of jokes in it. There's lots of montages. So in a way, it's a return, Steve, you said it, it's a return to personal responsibility for assessing what reality is. A lot of people just want to be told because it's more comforting. Just like Clarence Thomas says, "Oh, abortion's not mentioned in the Constitution, therefore we can't rule on it." That's an easy solution. That's a lazy, intellectually lazy conclusion to make. And shame on all of them for doing that. I'm sorry if you're pro-life or some silly term like that. If you were pro-life, you'd pay for good education, healthcare, and food for kids. But we don't, because then it's like socialism. Okay, Effie, his hand has been up for a while.
Okay, so Didn't, in the beginning of the, before he went out, didn't he say he wasn't going to give any charity to anybody there? And then
Yes.
he gives the money to the guy
Right.
who,
Yep.
so that's one of the things where he says one thing and does another.
Okay, but what does that say? It says he has a heart and he was
Yeah,
moved by this.
I didn't criticize him for him. His actions are much better than what he says in the beginning, in the very beginning of the talking to his secretary or whatever she is. He says a lot of things there that later in the movie, he goes ahead and does exactly the opposite.
Well, maybe this is his journey too.
What?
Maybe it's his journey as well.
Oh.
That he came expecting one thing and had to deal with another. And
could you, I didn't understand, I'm getting older, I didn't understand the ending. So when you're talking about it, could you explain what happened? Because I couldn't follow it.
Okay. The second to last scene is through the scope, or it's him wounded by a bullet from the dumb boyfriend in the back of the pickup truck, just like they do with pigs, for tourists, right? Antonio never meant to kill the guy. He meant to scare the hell out of him, chase him away, because Antonio wanted to support the status quo. My wife, keep your hands off. My daughter, keep your hands off. Get the hell out of here. Don't upset my apple cart. The stupid ex-boyfriend says, oh, it was like, I thought you wanted me to kill him, or whatever. It's unknown, but he was an idiot. So then we go, he's lying on the ground. There's a close-up of his head, kind of breathing heavily. We don't know if he's going to make it or not. It fades out to black and it fades in to the what looks like a wake or a memorial service or a funeral. Remember, Nuria is dressed in black, as is the man who's talking to her, and there are flowers and there's coffee and silver out. It's very formal, like it's a funeral parlor or a wake. And then he shows up and we say, whoa, what's going on here? I thought he was dead. And then it turns out to be a news press conference for promoting his book based upon a writer who goes back to his hometown and uncovers terrible corruption or moral corruption and a lack of integrity and meanness there. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. But did this actually happen, or was this just the book he was writing?
Oh, that's why the last image in the book is the guy does this sheepish grin to the camera. That's meant to aimed at you and me. He's saying, you figure it out. And the answer is,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I mean, if you say it's all a book, it's all fiction, it never happened. Okay, what do you glean from it? If you say, oh, it really did happen, and this is his write-up, and he just embellished the ending a little, is it all a lie? Is some of it a lie? Was he lying then, now? How can we trust this guy ever? And the answer is, it's his right to claim that you should trust him because he seduced you into reading the book and watching the movie and liking it. That's the artist's reward. You can hate him for putting you in that position, but he put you there by design. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I mean, that's why this film is so much fun, and your questions are great and your perceptions are great because it's meant to screw with your mind. Those of you may remember a goofy film from the 40s called Hellzapoppin' with Martha Ray. It's like a psychedelic film, like in the 60s and in the 70s, after Vietnam, when there were psychedelic films that sort of were circuitous. And there were other films that like confused you about what's real, and the film, well, there was La Ronde, where this gonorrhea gets passed from person to person in a circle of French elite. And then there was the film starring Anthony Quinn called, he's a rich man who puts two people through a maze, not the Minotaur, but the Magus. And you don't know if it was real or a game played for their benefit.
Jim, there was Ship of Fools where they're on a ship, whatever, and it's real, but they're all supposedly dead.
Okay, I'll have to see that one. I didn't see it. But the point is, and in that film, Anthony Quinn quotes, I think it's T.S. Eliot, we are meant to not cease from exploration and to wind up at the beginning and see ourselves for the first time. Okay.
Jim.
So the journey helps you perceive yourself. Yes, Arlene.
Yeah, this discussion is very helpful to me. And I realized in that last scene, it was so out of sync. He was sitting there in a very hot looking pair of sunglasses. And it looked like a kind of a white dinner jacket. It looked to me like he was Mr. Hollywood, or pretending to be Mr. Hollywood. And I thought that was him laughing at the audience because he sucked everybody in.
It could have been the filmmaker laughing at him, the character, saying, now that you made it, you get to wear white glasses and be eccentric.
Right. Yeah.
It
was such a weird experience to see that.
It's funny, those of you who watch cooking shows like Master Chef, there was this obese chef who was quite good, a judge. I forget his name. And between seasons, he lost a lot of weight and he came back with white glasses like that, framing his eyes in white plastic. And it's just a signature of a changed identity, you know. And so I don't know how to see it. I thought that struck me too, that he seemed more false there, you know, but he's back in his artist mode again, being devilish and impish. I got you, you know, so he could play with his own image because he's an artist. Who hasn't spoken? Brad, and then Steve Zimmerman again, and Gail next. Sorry, Steve, Gail, then Steve.
Yeah, Brad. This is just a little detail about the jury for the artwork. Yeah, originally there were 3 members, but there was a little detail that at the end, the 3rd member who seemed sympathetic with Daniel, is that his name?
Yeah, Mendoza.
Yeah, with his arguments, he withdraws from the committee. He becomes the abstentionist. And I mean, how that's our world today, where we have the conservative side that don't want to rock the boat. We've got our Daniel, who is, you know, subversive. And then we have that 3rd member who withdraws.
Why do you think he withdrew?
And you know, look at our politics. Yeah. Those are the people that withdrew, that gave us Donald Trump, that gave us this repeal of Roe versus Wade, the people that stayed home.
Brad, why do you think Mendoza withdrew?
Was that his name?
Mendoza, the third juror. The guy in the sweater.
It was unclear. I don't think he wanted to be a party to what was going on.
Right. I agree with you. He said, okay, in a way, he was, perhaps if Daniel had not been there, he would have been more conservative and sided with her on the jury. But because of this new force in town, he was swayed and he agreed with Daniel all the time. And maybe when they reversed it, he chose to disengage so that he wouldn't be identified with the objector status of Daniel. I compare him to the clerk in the hotel, the night clerk, who writes a story, gives it to him, and he reads it and he says, wow, this is really good. Clarity of vision, simplicity of language, it's an asset. In other words, say what you mean. I'm going to take out one of my stories and put one of yours in the next collection. And I'll get it published, and here's a tip, it pays for the publication. So it's like he's not a total meanie, but again, it allows for change. You know, that some people were affected positively by his presence there. Gail, please.
So of course you write what you know, But the one part that really bothered me in the film was the portrayal of women. And there was this strain of almost this man being a wife abuser and she not being able to leave and all of this. And and I thought that's what made me not like him so much. His approach to women in the whole film.
Wait, who is the abusive husband? Antonio, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, you don't have to like him. You're not really meant to.
No, but our main character, I didn't like him because he saw some of this and he didn't react to it. I didn't like the way he treated most women in the whole film.
He was solicitous with his secretary, Nuria, although he was her boss. And
right.
Go do it. And she was loyal. She was saying, I'll go with you. I'll do everything I usually do because I run interference for you. He wasn't mean to her. And at the end, she was with him. So he didn't fire her. So I don't see any.
But what about the women that he portrayed in the small town? How did he portray them? And maybe that's what he needed to do for his book, but I still didn't like it.
Well, I think of the scene when they go to the lagoon and it's empty and he winds up kissing her in the car and both of them realize, oh, this isn't going to work. And they turn away from each other and say nothing. It's hilarious. And then the husband comes up. It's like, even Daniel there is just a man, and he's never married. He's never had relationships. And this is some woman he was nuts about, but he had to leave and she had to stay. So again, it's the rift between you can't go home again. She's not going to love you. She's got this life with this man and a daughter. So it's like he's mortal too. I'm not putting him up on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. But that was a particularly weird scene when it happened. I kind of like, oh, how could you do that? But then I said, oh, he's vulnerable and he's feeling his oats from high school. And then he realizes ain't going to work. And so does she. And they're not angry with each other. They just wait for help. A charming scene. Arla, do you have a comment? And then Iris.
Yes. Oh, so two things. First of all, I didn't really think much about the portrayal of women in the film until it was just now raised, but as an issue. But my reaction to that is, after all, this was a culture of machismo. I mean, that's the culture, and especially in a small town. But I wanted to go back to the idea of ambiguity at the end of the film. And, some people may feel that it's disconcerting and, settling that there's not a clear, definitive answer. But to me, it really harkened back to and reminded me of the films of Farhadi, the Iranian,
yes.
Who won the Oscar twice for Iran with his films. And, I'm probably misquoting here, but the gist is that Farhadi once said something to the effect that, his job is just to present the information, the material, and it's what the viewer brings to the film. And basically it requires the viewer not to be passive, but to be in a way an active player or an active participant in the film. So I loved the ending, and I loved that feeling of like, oh, so, let me try to figure this out and what really happened, and kind of just, the surprise ending. So I thought it was great.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing up Farhadi. I've seen about 3 of his films. There's 2 current ones out. I think that's kind of coy and misleading on his part intentionally. Remember, he's Iranian and he has to run around with censors. So of course he's going to present a very naturalistic set of stories, the way it would have happened in life as Iranians know it. But he doesn't comment on it. He's relying on the individual to read between the lines, to see the reality for what it is. This harkens back to the Italian neorealists like De Sica. Even Fellini was a neorealist post-war, where the Italian reality on the streets was so bleak, you didn't have to editorialize about it. All you had to do was show it. This is like Bicycle Thief, Pickpocket by Bresson, which is a French film, also neorealist, where we don't have to tell people what to feel. They will, because they will recognize the situation if we tell it truthfully. if we put it out there. So, I share your respect for him as a filmmaker, but I think he's far more clever than he admits to, because he has to save his skin if he's going to keep working there.
Steve Zimmerman has had his hand up for a long time.
Okay, Steve, go.
Okay.
Sorry, Iris.
Three points. I'll try to make them succinct. One, I may be the only one who looks at it this way, but I see a certain level of intellectual dishonesty on the part of the artiste, the writer, the guy who's using poetic license. The fact is, most writers do borrow from real life. It's not just the people in the village who are reading into his books, but in point of fact, I think it's probably very fair to say if he's going to write about his village and the characters that can't leave, there are characters in that village that he is writing about. So I think there's a certain level of duplicity or intellectual dishonesty to say that, oh, I didn't really put you in this book. That's the way you're looking at it. I think there was a lot of those people were in that book. Now, yes, he probably used some poetic license or whatever, but that's one aspect I thought I'd mention. And it's also magnified when you go to the sterile scene at the end, or even the Nobel Prize ceremonies where it's a tea service and white gloves, and you're writing about people as if they're ethnographic specimens or something, right? There is something kind of very unpleasant about that situation. With regard to Gail's point about how women were being portrayed, I mean, look, Irene's relationship to her husband, Titi, was sick. It was a pathological relationship, but he's not going to be able to change that. Like you said, Jim, but it was his unrequited love for her that may have been a factor in why he wanted to go back to that village, or if you want to just think it's a story or creative
one
fiction.
story of many that drew him back.
Yeah, that would have been a driving reason for him to kind of go back to the village and see her. I think those were the main points I want to make.
Okay, Iris, you had something?
Yeah, I thought back to the scene when he's being driven at the beginning of the movie, when he's being driven in the car. I think that's where he tells the story about a pair of twins.
Yes,
one has
right.
the beard and one doesn't have the beard.
Yes.
Well, I think that ties into this, to the whole picture, where at the beginning of the picture, he doesn't have a beard. During the entire episode, he has a beard. And then at the end, when he's asking us, well, is it real or isn't it real? At the end of that award ceremony, he doesn't have a beard.
Yeah,
So I
thank you for
figure,
bringing it up. I didn't realize that, but you're right. It's such a strong parallel. But that's the artist, the filmmaking artist playing with us. Now, this was based on a book, I believe. So it may have made it easier for the filmmaker. We're running out of time. I want to review my notes.
Can you tell us something about the filmmaker a little bit?
I can't. I didn't research that.
You were going to talk about the thugs.
The thumb.
The thugs.
Thugs.
The thugs.
Okay.
And the political part of that.
So it's very political, but that's behind the scenes. And it's about populism. Let's go back. When he arrives in the mayor's office the next morning, there are two very large portraits on the wall behind him. This is City Hall now. Do you know who those people were? Evita
Of course,
Peron.
the Perons, Juan and Ava.
Right. So he's a Peronist. This is a man who wants to harken back into the past, right? The old way, the way it used to be when Grandpappy was in power. It's sort of places him as a populist in the worst sense of the term. Because
Talking about the Daniel or the mayor?
The mayor. The mayor had Eva Peron and her husband portrayed in huge portraits on the wall, devoting his loyalty to it. Why? Because probably that's how most of the people felt. And there was some point, I'll try and look it up, where, okay. So Dr. Romero, in his tirade against him of being anti-art, he accuses him of foreign influence and hate for your roots of Salas, right? What does this sound like? It sounds like Clarence Thomas or Donald Trump or the Proud Boys or America First people, the First Flag people. Let's take it back to the way it was. Well, it never was that way in the first place. And they accuse you of being other than. It's otherizing people who happen to be also white, but are a different political persuasion, like otherizing the Jews in Germany or the gypsies or the homosexuals. So this to me smacks of Trumpism, right? Foreign influence, those immigrants, you're trying to replace us, right? With the immigrants. It's a cabal of the Democrats to make us a white minority, right? As though we haven't always benefited from immigrants our whole career, our whole history, going back to the Black slaves. And then there's another, and then the guy bursts into a lecture and lambasts him. And Daniel is extremely tolerant and kind and hears him out until the very end. And basically says, truth surpasses fiction, which is a way you've heard the expression in LA, you can't write this stuff.
Yeah.
When reality is so astonishing, right? Nobody could have imagined anyone would say that, but he just did. And what the guy just, he reads from his books, and quotes, and it's like distorting, the art as propaganda. There's also a lot of references to propaganda in this. When he arrives in town, there's a video shown, right, by the disc jockey who voiced it about Daniel's history in the town. And it's filled with all these stock visual effects from iMovie. And it's corny as hell. And it's hilarious if if a grandson or grandchild has ever done a bar mitzvah video for you or a 60th or 70th birthday video for you. It's such a spoof. It's hilarious when you look at it that way. And he says to the people in the audience, he says, if I am a monster, as this man said, can I still be an artist? Right? In other words, forget about who I am. Could I do this to you if I were such a monster? Right? Like can Wagner's, anti-Semitic music be, or Mahler's even, can it be beautiful music? And the answer is, of course it can. You just have to be cognizant of that. Here's an interesting thing. He's walking on the street. He wants to experience life as it is lived in Salas, and he writes it. He sees a sign on the shop. We've been robbed. Please come in. As it's like, we're hurting financially. Please do some business with us. And he takes a picture of it, or he takes out his notebook and he makes a note of it. Like, here is the writer gathering information that he wants to use later. I thought that was a lovely touch. Buying the wheelchair for the boy, he's allowed a change of heart. He doesn't want to be mean. I did make a big deal of it. It was a surprise. I think if they didn't have that, it would have made him too curmudgeonly for the movie. So they did that to soften him, not to call him a hypocrite. And of course, it's hilarious when the daughter pulls off the helmet, and it's the woman he just slept with after, salaciously recouping his exploits with Antonio in the kitchen. Very funny moment. And then Antonio discusses his theory of fidelity in marriage. I don't care if she flirts around and screws around, and she shouldn't care if I do, because I still come home to the same person every night. And it's, this clear understanding of they don't know what fidelity really is. And then Sophia appears in his room. Oh, he has a dream. All the various people appearing with guns, and we don't know it's a dream until he wakes up in the morning. And some of them are very funny portraits of people we've all seen, not just Antonio. So the filmmaker is making fun of the people in town through the eyes of Daniel. And then Antonio showing up with a mask on his face at the very end. That's hilarious. That's like he's a monster, right? He says he got into a fight with his friend, who bloodied his nose. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It doesn't tie in, but I think the mask is a standout feature that's ridiculing Antonio. And in a way, he's hiding behind a mask of what? Propriety? He's angry. He's worried, as we saw in the dinner scene, when he makes his wife get up and says, "Give me a kiss," and then he plants this sexy kiss on her mouth. He's clearly threatened by Daniel's presence there. So the animosity that comes out in the end when he finds out he slept with his daughter is not unexpected. It's not a surprise. Okay, why does he go on the hunt? Why does he accept the ride from Antonio? I can't answer that. So sorry, it's a problem with the script. Doesn't mean the rest of it's wrong. But then there's this audio montage of all the hateful lines people have said that are ringing in his head as he's traveling on the back of the pickup. Where, he's really forced to live with what he's fleeing from. So this is a way as an advertisement of the forces of evil, darkness that conspire against the artist. Those are all my notes. If anybody wants to add anything, I don't have much more to say. I love Gail Shiner's smile the whole night. I don't know if it's frozen that way, Gail, but I think you really like the movie, which is always gratifying, and your comments were welcome. Does anybody have anything else to add? Oh, okay. I wish I had something to announce for 2 weeks from tonight. I have to clear the dates with the powers that be. But we'll do something fun. I've seen a bunch of movies. I just watched Breaker Morant. Has anybody seen that like 30 years ago? It's a courtroom drama set in Australia. Brad, permit me to lovingly say you would have seen it. It's a really interesting movie directed by Bruce Beresford, who became, after that movie, quite a well-respected Australian director. And the film he did after that about the South African situation was not quite as good. So I'm fond of that and fond of lots of others I'm watching. So I am watching out for you. Howard, welcome. You didn't say much tonight. I do welcome your contributions, Howard. I don't know if you heard my comment, but it was, I appreciate you when you bring that stuff up because it helps us illuminate the films for other people. Arla, thank you for showing up. You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Julie's on two screens. I guess that means your Marvin is lurking in the background. And you're all welcome. It's great to have you. And you'll hear from me in about a week. I'll have another movie for you. So thanks for a great discussion. Joel Jaspin, I didn't recognize you. I hope you got something out of it. This was a really cool movie if you love movies. And I hope the discussion helped you feel that way about it. So good night. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jim.
Bye. Thank you.
Night.
Roz, are you still there? Roz?